invite Father Lindsay Lobo, Assistant Professor, Secretary College Satyanarayan, to come over the desk. Father Lindsay Lobo, alumnus of Satyanarayan, as a student and loved teacher now, is a man of all seasons other than rainy season perhaps. After roaming in Rome, Father Lindsay landed here in Chennai in 2021. He has been an active staff member in SNRI, a well-updated teacher in teaching skills, and also inspires students with his photography and computer skills and sports. Dear Father Lindsay, we are very happy to have you here today as one of the resource persons. And now may I request you to address us in the second session of this seminar. Please note, the speaker will have 20 minutes followed by 10 minutes of interactive session.
Okay, thank you, Royster. And so, as you all can see, the topic that I have selected is discovering self through the moral social realm. And I would like to begin through the famous saying of Socrates, that is, know thyself and you will know the world. Now, this is something that has been echoed by all philosophers, and this represents the longing of all human beings. At the same time, we see that humans have been intrigued with the essence of self, the whole thing of knowing what is the self, discovering the self, especially with regards to its contents, to its sources, in order to get a better understanding of life. And we see that Socrates takes a recourse to knowledge in order to find this out. But today we'll be proceeding more towards the moral social realm, trying to understand how self is being discovered through George Herbert Mead's interpretation. The question, who am I? I think all of us will be familiar with that. At one point of time, we would have asked ourselves. Well, this question cannot be merely considered as a biographical question that only tries to obtain information about our origin or status. It has to be an ontological and ethical question that seeks an understanding of the essence of a person's existence, and at the same time it also refers to the life strategy that is required in order to attain that essence. At the same time, one cannot understand this entire question of self-discovery as the analysis and true knowledge of the potentialities of an individual. Now, when we speak about the self-discovery, first and foremost, this basically refers to a thorough analysis of ourselves, an introspection as such, in order to come to a proper understanding of what truly consists or constitutes ourselves. The 21st century welcomes all of us with a lot of challenges, and we are given various tasks that test our overall mental and physical ability. Let's take, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic. This, I feel, has been one of the biggest challenges of this century, because man was put in such a situation wherein he was not able to determine what had to be done in order to remedy the situation. And therefore this led to the whole concept of self-discovery. Why? Because when you are in a situation where you do not know what to do, you tend to rely on something that you have for yourself as concrete, and that is your identity. Now, the importance of the discovery of self has gained a lot of significance in the past few years, and there's a lot of effort that has gone to understand oneself. And at the same time, there's been a lot of effort to also deal with stress and challenges that have been put forth in this new era. Now, most people would generally associate self-discovery with taking a personality test or doing some soul searching in order to figure out what they really want to do. In fact, self-discovery, we see, is fundamental to the personal development, and it has many implications along the way. Now let's take a look at the purpose or the essence of human life. Now, as we all have established, the question, who am I, entails an ontological setting. And one of the reasons for this is that this question concerns the meaning, purpose, and essence of human existence in general. And when we normally question our essence or being, the question does not arise because we have forgotten who we are. It arises basically because of the nature of the human situation. And therefore the basis of this question lies in the fact that nothing seems to give us perpetual happiness. Nothing is absolutely guaranteed for anyone. Now, different thinkers have gone to various extents in order to explain this. And this goes to indicate that there can be many solutions to the question of who I am. At the same time, we see a lack of knowledge of the self decreases self-efficacy and self-respect. When you do not know who you are confused. And this also then leads to a lack of morale within the person. Your self-confidence reduces and you are always trying to look for something which may or may not be there. Whereas when you look at self-discovery, we see that self-discovery awakens the passion that we all of us have within us. And this discovery ultimately leads to self-fulfillment and satisfaction. And therefore we see that once we discover, once we understand the roots of ourselves, we are then able to continue on the path. When the individual is comfortable with the true self, it is only then where he can achieve what he has. Next, we shall take a look at the true self as a source of meaning in life. Now, we see that most philosophers and thinkers are basically of the view that acting in accordance with the inner self is the key to self-fulfillment. And therefore scholars have commented on how the erosion of culturally embraced structures and sources of meanings have left the individual with the primary task of finding the meaning of life. Existential philosophers have long held the view that coming to a deep realization of one who imbues life with a sense of authentic purpose. Similarly, we see that scholars of eudaimonic well-being consider meaning in life to be the central component of human flourishing. And therefore it becomes evident that when faced with a challenge or a tough situation, individuals begin to look to their individuality for solutions and answers to the various questions. Similarly, we see that choices and actions are judged in terms of how they make the self feel, and those acts that we do, those decisions that we take, it makes the inner self feel good. And when this happens, we are then able to value our choices. So ultimately it all boils down to finding the very essence of the self. Now from this it becomes evident that there is a unique relationship between the core elements of the self and the experience of meaning. Now meaning is not simply obtained from performing well, but it is the feeling that one is in touch with and enacting goals that are expressions of who one believes he or she really is. And therefore we see that the true self should be connected to a number of other sources, such as relationships, goals, and authentic behaviors. This does not mean that relationships and goals are not meaningful in themselves, but rather we see that the true self provides a person with a unique life philosophy. Next, let's come to the unearthing of the essence. Now, here we take recourse to the existentialists, and we see that dealing with concepts such as self-discovery, self-understanding, they teach us that first and foremost, man exists. It is only then that he defines himself. And therefore, existentialists maintain the view that man is free and can spontaneously bring about any desired change in the state of affairs. From the existentialist, we come to know that self-discovery comes from a constant analysis of the self and a commitment to whatever values he has chosen and the objectives that he has set. At the same time, in this particular scenario, one also realizes that it is the totality of one's acts that really matters. It is the totality of one's potential that gives one's meaning in life. And therefore, existentialism also indicates that there is no more universal moral code to which the individual should avert his conduct. At the same time, we see that the essence or the purpose of life is what man discovers and works out in the course of living for himself. So, as we move towards the path of self-discovery, first and foremost, we realize that the individual should begin from the self. We first start from ourselves, and it is only when that the individual can think of the possibility of himself, when he has got a thorough understanding of himself, it is only then that he can proceed towards really unearthing this essence, really looking at his inner scope and inner self. Now we take the help of George Herbert Mead, who basically gave us a relational, sociological and moral view in self-discovery. Now we see that the works of Mead provide a solid and sustained basis if one wants to engage relational sociology and morality in our day-to-day life situation. Now let us take a look at why Mead's work is very important for us to discover ourselves. First and foremost, the theory of Mead emphasizes the need for moral integration and habituation as an inherent aspect of the emergence of self. Next, we see that his theory has the advantage of explaining how the interactional process of socialization brings generalized moral expectations into the experience of the individual. That is, it is only when we interact with one another can we be able to then get a proper worldview about ourselves. Thirdly, we see that Mead's theory also lays emphasis on the presence of the mundane reflexivity in interaction. And finally, Mead's theory of the self is based on a simultaneous process of socialization and individuation. Coming to the social emergence of self, one can say that the arguments of Mead are better suited in providing a relational explanation of how people engage with morality in practice in the ways that they do. And here we see that Mead's theory provides an interactional account of how and why the self is necessarily socially constituted and embedded. The self finds its meaning in the society, in its interactions with others. To put it in other words, we can say that when we interact with one another, the others are like a mirror. And therefore, whatever we do, however the person reacts to us, that is a self-indication to us of how our behavior has been. If you are rude, you will expect to get a rude answer back. If you are smiling, happy, you can also expect the other person to display a positive mood. And therefore, Mead describes the emergence of self as primarily a mediated process of socialization through which the person's experience is integrated with the internalized attitudes of others. It is through the others that you ultimately lead to this self-fulfillment and self-discovery. At the same time, we see that Mead also provides a description of the emergence of self as a process of the habituated internalization of generalized expectations that endangers the development of a reflexivity capable agent. And in other words, we can say that Mead's work provides us with a description of how we as actors engage with practice at varying levels in our lives. Mead argues that individuals can develop the capacities associated with selfhood only through social interaction. And he argued that having a self means having the capacity for self-conscious awareness of oneself as an object of reflexive consideration. And this is where we see that what Mead refers to as the I emerges, which is to say that the child develops a sense of herself or himself as a subject who acts. But at the same time, the child can also assume a perspective towards her actions, having arrived at a degree of awareness of how her actions have been received. For example, if you behave badly, you will be punished. So similarly, depending on the way you ask for certain things, you also get a positive or a negative answer. And it is based on these reflexes, on these responses, that ultimately you begin to develop a concept. Now for me, the I is the actor who is in the process of doing the acting. He is the person who is doing the monitoring of action, and as the self develops, the I also does the reflecting upon oneself. And he says that the individual gradually develops a sense of the self as an object. Now indeed we see that this process begins as the attitudes of others become internalized in relation to one's own. For example, as a child, if we did not use the word please, our parents sometimes refused to give us something. Why? Because they wanted us to use the word please. And therefore as a child, what we realized is, if we do not use the word please, if we are not polite in asking, we won't get it. And slowly, this behavior, these small things led us to develop a concept, to develop the capacity of assuming a particular attitude. That is to be polite, that is to ask respectfully. And this basically then leads to internalization of various attitudes. Mead commonly reserves the me to refer to stages further on in the development of the self, in which he says that the individual has taken on the attitudes of the generalized others, with he engages more abstractly. So, It is here that the me aspect of the self develops as the collective self and utilized in the engagement with themselves as a subject. Speaking about the dialogic selfhood, we can see that what needs to be significantly indicated here is that the emergence of the self is a product of intersubjectively mediated self-understanding. Now, Mead explains individuation as being an inherent facet of the social constitution of the self, in which interactional engagement within a complex social context is productive of a simultaneously embedded and individuated subjectivity. And once this is internalized and generalized, and once specific attitudes are developed dialogically, we see that this then leads the individual to bring different perspectives into play. Finally, we can take a look at the Rosicrucians. Now, who are the Rosicrucians? They are a community of philosophers who study and practice the natural laws governing the universe. And therefore, their mission is to provide seekers with spiritual wisdom that is necessary for them to reach deep down and be connected with themselves. So, they have suggested a few things that could basically help the individual to arrive at this self-discovery. First and foremost is introspection, looking at oneself. Next, they also say that we need to be modest, avoid flaunting our accomplishments and not being boastful. We also need to be decisive, that is, once a decision has been taken, after careful consideration, it needs to be worked out upon. Next, they also tell us to be a frontliner. In life, it's important to take risks, and without risks, you won't be able to discover other things. For example, if a person is content with himself, he will not be able to realize that he can do something else. Next, prudency is also very important. We did not delight in the downfall of others, nor gloat about our achievements. And therefore, humility is one in which we are able to keep a balance between ourselves and who we really are. Then they also tell us to be content with what is there and practice moderation, because moderation in all things helps to avoid excessive preoccupation with fleshly desires. And finally, a self-analysis from time to time also plays a very important part in discovering oneself, in discovering one's essence. And finally, to conclude, I would like to take certain cues from this pandemic situation in which all of us would have discovered something or the other about ourselves. Now, first and foremost, when the classes were online, I'm sure the academicians may not agree with this, but for the students, it was definitely an opportunity to engage in other skills rather than simply memory and study. As a result of this, we saw that people began to discover various talents. Google and the internet, especially YouTube, saw the surge of a number of channels being created. People who had different talents, somebody who could cook, started putting up their content. Because cooks could not come to certain places, people started discovering the skills of cooking. And similarly, since people were locked down and had a lot of time at their disposal, various other talents were discovered. So therefore we see that it is a situation in which we are in that forces us to take drastic steps, and these drastic steps ultimately lead us to self-discovery. A perfect example of this could be when it comes to swimming. You can either send a person for classes, or you can directly throw the person into the water and hope that he would basically develop the inborn talent of swimming. And therefore, it is only we, through our society, through others around us, that can develop the real I, the real me. And therefore, in conclusion, taking at what Mead says, we can say that it is only through the attitudes that we gain from others around us that we can truly develop ourselves and truly look at our inner essence in order to achieve self-fulfillment. Thank you.
We have still some time left. If there are any questions or doubts are there, please feel free to ask.
Just to break the ice. See, the self is socially constructed. Am I right? So without the other person, is it possible to construct oneself? Because we need the other. If there were no human person on the earth except one person left in the world, would that have been a possibility of evolution of self?
If we are all alone, we normally discover that what we are doing is right. In that way, there is no natural indication for us as what is right, what is wrong. Because we are the master, it's like being on a desert island. You are entirely the master of it. You can do whatever you want. Now, it is only when you are in relation with others that restrictions come in. And we basically also see that only, for example, one of the philosophers who basically mentions you have the I and you have the others. So therefore we see that the other acts as a boundary or a barrier towards me to check my actions, and similarly I also act as a check for the actions of the others. So in this way, the society or the others around us act as a check on our actions, and this check will ultimately lead us to discover ourselves.
The other one creates yourself.
Other one helps. It helps. It aids our self-discovery.